Greetings, everyone, and welcome to week 6 of the course. I have commented on CLRs and in announcements about keeping your discourse academic in nature because I've noticed an abundance of colloquialisms, slang, abbreviations, and text speech that should not be present in your academic writing. Keep that in mind for any writing you submit in this course. Next week, there will not be a recorded lecture. The readings speak for themselves, and I'm eager to see your insights. I enjoyed doing office hours this past week, and having the opportunity to put more faces to names. You guys are all very wonderful, guys and gals. Even if hours are not scheduled, remember I'm always available via email and will gladly schedule a meeting with you to offer clarity as needed. Our topic this week is hip hop and Black masculinity. To be safer with a knowledge of the scope of our readings and what we will discuss relative to the CLR songs, we are actually going to focus on African American masculinity more than Black masculinity in general. I make this distinction because masculinity is something that has different expectations that are culturally and societally constructed, so location matters. Let's start with a basic definition for masculinity, which would be a set of qualities and behaviors regarded as features of men or being manly within a social group. Masculinity is a construct that entails the expectations of being a man. It exists in a binary with femininity often, which would entail the expectations of being a woman or being womanly. Recent research is steering away from this socially imposed binary to understand gendered behavior as something that exists on a spectrum. But for the purposes of our present discussion, and based on what is seen in the readings, this understanding is still entirely necessary. Hegemonic masculinity refers, Hegemonic masculinity refers to the dominant idiom of masculinity within a society. So this is the performance of masculinity that kind of maintains the stereotypical traits of being manly men, which doesn't really allow alternative performance of masculinity to be included. Taking it one step further, toxic masculinity is used in media and academia to describe the unrealistic expectations of hegemonic masculinity that often produce behaviors that harm women, children, and the men who subscribe to them. Toxic masculinity is complicated with the addition of intersectionality, which is the interconnection of social categories of a given individual that create an overlapping system of discrimination. So that means you may be Asian, you may have a disability. All of these things work together to form a specific type of discrimination that you face. I know I just went through a few definitions rapidly, but I wanted to define them now because I'll be using them in this lecture and in a later lecture. So I wanted to make sure you had a reference point. The Boylorn article from 2017 is about contemporary depictions of Black masculinity in films. This particular lens is important because movies often reflect the cultural currents of society, something that is accessible to everyone in society who can pay to watch. Movies reflect how someone is seen and understood, often created by individuals like those depicted in the film for authenticity and to promote cultural awareness, understanding, and acceptance. Although we will talk about Black cinema in greater detail in the coming weeks, Boylorn's article is about Black masculinity more generally and offers a few films that I would encourage you to watch prior to the week where we focus on cinema. Boylorn historicizes the creation of hip hop films as vehicles for illuminating characters' relationships with hip hop, stating that their performances of Black masculinity were closely connected to the relationship with hip hop. What is this communicating? It is placing characters in a place of cultural production and linking the production of hip hop products to the creation of their identity as a meaningful representation of masculinity. In this way, their participation in hip hop was a form of masculinity. Boylorn recognizes that hip hop became more edgy and violent in the 1990s, which led to media depictions of Black men who patronized the genre that were more sexually driven, angry, and violent, giving birth to the thug persona that was present in films created by young Black men. Hip hop's popularity from the 1980s made the films produced in the next two generations possible, although they demonstrated shifts in the genre and performance of masculinity expected. In the film Baby Boy, the viewers led to believe that, quote, Black manhood is inextricably connected to violence, end quote. Something that motivates the image of the Black woman sacrificing while the man is tangled in a web of drugs, violence, and sex. In this way, the film sends the message that the Black family is a fragile structure. The Black woman needs to be the salvation of the Black man, and the world entices him with its many expectations and temptations, to bring about the demise of the Black man. Boylorn states, quote, representations of Black men in film have largely mimicked representations of Black men in society, end quote, but I would argue that films have the power to shift societal representations as well, something the author later states and something understood in the cultural deviation from depictions of Black manhood like those in Baby Boy and other films like it. This is not to say that the story in the film is not valid, but it does limit perceptions of Black existence and futures for African Americans and in the white gaze. The audience is the world, and like music, movies are a lasting export that shape how cultural identity is perceived. Boylorn's description of 1991 film Boys in the Hood, favorite of mine, and focus on John Singleton is especially beneficial. This movie was a successful film at the box office with audiences and critics alike, and managed to be compassionate and complex while skillfully telling a story that could resonate across races. If you have not seen it before, please watch it. Lawrence Fishburne plays Furious, a central masculine father figure and role model who aids in shaping the character of his son, Trey, who is played by Cuba Gooding Jr., whose mother states that she cannot teach him how to be a man. This is big. This dynamic separates Trey from his friends whose fathers are absent. Furious demonstrates a range of emotion in caring for his son, and his performance of masculinity encompasses a range of considerations. Quote, Furious's masculinity performance privileges leadership, respect, and accountability, and is tempered and characterized by swagger, intelligence, kindness, and respect, end quote. Boylorn celebrates these features while coming to the conclusion that the Afrocentric patriarchal masculinity performed is something is sometimes sexist towards women. So what do you think Singleton's intention was in creating the character with these limitations? Also consider why Trey's performance of masculinity in the film is not as accepted by the community as Doughboys, so that's Ice-T's. Ice Cubes. And his is deviant, violent masculinity, and has a rejection for authority. These limiting tendencies, when connected to the cool pose, act as a defense mechanism to aid in the image of resilience often necessary for Black males to survive. Continue reading through this chapter and I will add additional comments to your perusal comments. When I spoke to students last week, it was clear that some of the readings are more difficult than others. That is okay, but it is necessary to give yourself time to read and comprehend before writing comments on the document. I really look forward to reading what you have to say. The additional reading, the Daily Trojan article on the changing landscape of hip hop masculinity, reflects the liberation of thoughts associated with sexuality and gendered identity as something that exists on a spectrum, its acceptance by a younger generation, and the liberation of hip hop as a genre through its openness to the changing reality. The LGBTQI population is increasing, and the majority of that population is composed of millennials. Toxic masculinity does not resonate with them. There is a constant push and pull between youth culture and hip hop, evident since the genre's inception. The author of this article, Matthew Phillips, states his love for the genre before highlighting the work of Young Thug, Tyler the Creator, and Brockhampton as reflections of and catalysts for change in hip hop's masculinity. Phillips states, quote, the quintessential image of this street-hardened, sexually promiscuous man wielding a duffel bag and pistol is no longer an accurate depiction of the genre, end quote, something he attributes to the diverse audience and creators of hip hop. I agree, with the knowledge that the function of hip hop has also shifted. The cultural perception of African-American men changed from the 1980s to the 2010s, something that is evident in the subgenres and styles that followed the original iteration of hip hop. In the 90s, hip hop went gangsta before mixing with neo soul, R&B, and pop, things that made it more accessible, marketable, approachable, safe, and constant in American culture outside of just musical culture. Hip hop artists sometimes had squeaky clean images or diversified their appeal by starting businesses with products that appeal to a broader audience. doing commercials, being on talk shows, becoming actors, authors, and taking other opportunities to become more visible, thus humanizing Black male bodies. Let's deviate briefly. Consider how the legacy of slavery and colonization have impacted Black masculinity. Slavery, in America directly connects to the way that Black and brown men's masculinity exists today and how they have been treated in society. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Africans in America were still fighting for personhood, their existence viewed as less than that of white citizens, enslaved and subjected to lives of involuntary servitude. Human beings do not go from being bought and sold to having their humanity accepted overnight, and America exists as a space where Black bodies exist, but were never meant to be catered to as the majority. In this way, Black masculinity in America is striving for something that has been unattainable, having your sexuality accepted as equal and not exoticized, having your strength considered equal and not feared, having equal access to resources and the freedoms to live and pursue the same goals without being told you're asking for too much or overreaching. We see these themes in the films as well. The hegemonic masculinity of 18th and 19th century America was racist, something that was not viewed as toxic because the laws were designed to enable it. In his piece, Black Masculinity Under White Supremacy, exploring the intersection between Black masculinity, slavery, racism, heterosexism, and social class, Pierre Aurelius writes thusly, quote, "The most common and dangerous argument made to justify the plight of people of African descent is that the white colonizers civilized the Africans, as if the latter were uncivilized and savage before the arrival of the former. The devastation for which many Blacks still seek recompense through their reparation movement suggests that their Blackness and race would have been a target. Black and brown men are often cast as excessively violent, but what would be more savage and brutal than invading the territory of people to colonize and enslave them? What can be more uncivilized than brutalizing and raping women, hanging men, and brutally exploiting their resources? And what can be more savage than depriving people of their freedom, separating fathers and mothers from their children, and vice versa? In short, what can be more savage and uncivilized than slavery and colonization instituted by white Europeans to expand their capitalist and economic quest and maximize their corporate profits?" End quote. Heavy. Aurelius writes with consideration for the pre-colonized Black man, who was deemed a savage by colonizers who witnessed their differing cultural practices and rage in being captured and taken from their loved ones and their homeland. Early colonial anthropologists would often describe any native in a foreign region as a savage or uncultured to normalize the seizure of their land, resources, and bodies, and to appease the uneasiness of the idea that their existence and culture within a distinct natural space where they make meaning would be forever changed and potentially forgotten. In this way, the history that was written about the monstrosities of colonization were shaped into a nation's history as progress at the cost of native inhabitants of the colonies and their collective histories. The enslavement of Africans in America reflects this history without American colonization of African spaces, but the African bodies removed from their original home, displaced to a foreign country with laws designed to subjugate them, continued for generations to see the liberation of enslaved bodies with a prolonged limitation of their civil liberties. Gradually, Black people in America, African Americans now, were legally provided equal rights with white Americans, but the reality of slavery still permeated in this atmosphere because the contemptuous relations between races legally persisted until the 1960s and has ripples that will continue beyond us. Black male slaves witnessed their women being raped and beaten by slave masters, and the rape of other Black men by slave masters as well to demonstrate dominance. With the end of slavery, they carry these images of dominance, which supersede masculine scripts from their original homeland, since these liberated slaves were of a different generation, one that only knew the hegemonic masculinity of their slave master, while their own suppressed masculinity entailed the hallmarks of suffering and subservience. So, what does that mean for African American men and their masculinity in America today? This is not a question you can easily answer or an easy talk to have, but one to consider as you listen to the songs in this course and engage with the readings. I'm grading your song analysis assignments, and should have grades complete by the coming weekend. I'm traveling this week, but I can always be reached via email. I hope everyone has a great week.